Well, here we are again on another Think With Me Thursday. Welcome. I'm Justin with Effective. We're going to hang out for a little bit here to start off with. But if you're joining the chat right away, do let me know in the comments in the chat where you're coming from, what you're thinking about today. Today we have an interesting stream lined up. First and foremost, we've kind of got a new setup for this stream using software called Restream. Instead of going through OBS directly, I'm using OBS as my webcam for this, so I can still do funky things like this right on the stream. But then also I have some other capabilities that we can use as well, which is kind of nice. I can add and remove graphics and things of that sort. Experimenting with some things that I'm hoping to do in the near future, such as coming back with our podcast process. I would love to do that as a live recorded show where folks like you can join and ask questions. And so it can be more of a dialogue, because I love doing podcasting and I love talking with you on these live streams. And I figured, why not try to mash the two of them together? I think it would be a really fun thing to try to experiment with. So be watching for that in the future. The main things we are going to hit on in the stream today is, well, first and foremost, I want to dive in a little bit deeper on the topic of productivity 3.0, or what I really feel is the next wave of personal productivity. And I think there's a lot of potential positives that we're really on the cusp of as far as the future of work goes and how we handle our lives and manage ourselves in the midst of that. So I want to dive a little bit into that. If we have some time, it'll be a little bit of a shorter live stream today, but if we have some time, we will have a way to, let's see. I have an article on deck, which I'll share if we get to it, and then also some room for some Q&A if you wish as well. But anyways, if you're just joining the stream again, welcome. Let me know where you're coming from. Would love to hear from you. Would love to just connect and see what you're thinking about today. And additionally, if you're joining us on both Twitter or LinkedIn, thanks for joining there as well. If you want to head on over to the YouTube channel, it's at youtube.com/effectiveco there. I'll put it in the chat. You want to join directly on the live stream on YouTube as well, but you should be able to get at least some of the chat messages and stuff on stream as well from those platforms. Yeah, so it's been kind of a busy couple of weeks here. I know we didn't have a stream last week solely because I was traveling for work a good chunk of the week, and then had to spend a bunch of time catching up. And so it just unfortunately didn't work to get the live stream into the schedule last week. But again, we're back this week, and so I'm grateful to be here having this conversation with you. So I'm still getting used to Restream a little bit, which is, like I mentioned, it can do some fun things. I can turn the chat overlay off, and so I can just have me on the screen. Again, I'm using OBS's virtual camera, so I can just hop over to the screen if I want to without doing funky stuff inside of Restream, which is pretty cool. But right now we're going to start talking about our topic for the day, which is productivity 3.0. I put an article out on my personal website. I wasn't, unfortunately, prepared for this. So I'm going to pop it in the chat now, though, if you're interested in following along. We've talked about it on the stream before, but I've been on this kind of journey over the last couple of years thinking about what is next for productivity. Productivity has gone through a number of phases over time. The first one really being in the advent of the modern knowledge work era, where people were getting used to working in offices because, early on in the 1900s, it was primarily industrial work. But now, moving into the 50s and 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was a lot more managerial type things going on, a lot more knowledge work, a lot more deliverables being passed around. And so people needed to figure out how to handle more information. I think that's really been the crux of what productivity has risen out of, is the need to handle more information. And so this first iteration of productivity, I think, really centered around planners and a lot of the early management thinkers and leadership thinkers. Zig Ziglar, John Maxwell come to mind, Stephen Covey. It's all about, how do you prioritize what's most important when you have a million things flying at you? And I think those are skills that are really helpful. Then the next phase of productivity came around, which I call productivity 2.0. It really struck about the same time Web 2.0 actually hit, which there's an interesting trend with this as well. We'll get into in just a minute. But this is where I think getting things done really kicked things off. This is where productivity gained a lot of traction in the world. It became kind of its own cult following, its own niche. I mean, this is where content creators like Merlin Mann came about, is in this productivity 2.0 era. Even Max Sparky, David Sparks, and others in that time frame, they were really around the rise of the digital task manager. You have Kinkless GTD, which was an Omni Outliner extension, which turned into OmniFocus, which was one of the first meaty getting things done style task managers. You have the rise of Lifehacker and Gina Trapani and all the stuff that they were doing over there in the kind of the Windows Android ecosystem that was rising up. And so you had this like Windows productivity side, you had this Mac productivity side, you had just this overall productivity, leadership, business, information management, because we saw this explosion of information because now everyone had access to the internet and everyone was publishing stuff there, which was a really positive thing, but we were a little overwhelmed as a result of it. And so many people in the business world were clinging to things like getting things done, which has been a really helpful methodology for a lot of people for a number of years. But things have kind of broken down since then. There's a lot of people who have been pushing these ideas of just follow these 6 steps and you'll be as productive as you need to be, almost presenting these silver bullet style solutions to find success in life. And unfortunately, we know those things just often don't pan out, but there are still problems at hand, especially as the digital world and its involvement has increased over the last 5 years or so, especially with the current situation in the world and having people to work fully remotely. There's a lot more digital information exchanging hands now. And not only on top of that, but we're still wrestling through some challenges of what does work actually look like in the modern day. Burnout is one of the number one problems facing knowledge workers. A very significant percent of knowledge workers actually struggle with burnout. And so there's some real challenges with that. And productivity tools and productivity mindsets haven't really come to save the day. Where Productivity 1.0 was just trying to get our arms around the situation, Productivity 2.0 was, how do we live efficiently? How do we move through all of this stuff and work efficiently? And this is where I think the next break comes. There's been some rumblings about it for the last 5 years or so, but I really think we're at an inflection point now into a new era of productivity, what I would call Productivity 3.0. Again, interestingly enough, this is also the era where people are talking about Web 3 or Web 3.0, whatever you want to call it. And I think there's an interesting correlation because there's a shift happening culturally and how we approach information and technology and how things are distributed and handled. But I think Productivity 3.0 is something that is a place where we can start to see a bigger picture in life. And I think there are 3 key facets of this that I want to talk through today. So the first one is personal knowledge management. A couple years ago, Rome Research became really big, so did Obsidian. And now there's a whole new class of note-taking applications called what I would call personal knowledge managers, backlinks, linking your thinking. Nick Milo's channel has been driving a lot of this as well. There's so much interest around this tools for thought space. And I think there's a good reason for that because we now have even more information, but people want to actually do something real with it. Where people would just clip and shove stuff into Evernote previously, they're finding that didn't work. And so now, how do we approach this information? And ultimately, how do we use this information in a meaningful way going forward? I think this is where personal knowledge management comes in. And there's a conception about PKM that I want to talk about here on this specific stream today in relation to Productivity 3.0, because in productivity, there's a lot of focus on tools. What tool are you using? How are you managing your tasks? How are you managing your calendar? What cool things are you doing? What automations are you building? These are all tooling things. They're all tactical things. But I think what can set apart Productivity 3.0 is to bring a more focus on the strategic and the visionary level of life. And so instead of focusing on what tools we're using for PKM or for productivity or for managing our lives, what mindsets are we using? What mindsets are we building? I posted a tweet the other day that I think is highly relevant to this. PKM, personal knowledge management, is not really a tool, but it's a mindset, and it's one that's built around connecting ideas. And when you start to connect ideas, when you build this mindset about trying to see and find and forge connections, these connections become a heck of a lot easier to handle, and they become a lot easier to notice in your everyday. So, for example, I was at a conference last week. One of the things that I saw happening there was just this connection between real world building a community, like literally a town. How do you keep a town together? How do you keep a town healthy? And online community building, which is the space that I work in for my day job. How do you build communities in the online space? And I hadn't seen the connection between the two of those prior, but I wasn't sitting down at Obsidian. I wasn't using a knowledge graph to figure this out, but I have been building this mindset of trying to connect ideas that might not be related to one another. And as a result of that, I was able to make this connection between those two. It's like, oh, there are principles in real community building that apply to online community building and vice versa. So having this mindset can be a really powerful thing. Then looking at productivity, we've talked about in Productivity 2.0, we're talking literally here managing tasks and projects and the work that needs to get done in your life. In Productivity 3.0, I see this really focused on building a mindset around what's essential. We talk about the 80-20 rule or the Pareto principle, if you've heard of that. But then there's even, you can take the Pareto principle and apply it multiple times to a list of things and get down to like the one or two most core items for you to focus on. And I think if we can narrow down in our lives, in the different areas of our lives, the core things to focus on, it becomes a heck of a lot easier to be able to live a healthy but also extremely productive life. This is where skill sets like engaging in deep work, potentially time blocking, or just managing your attention more. So time blocking is a tactic to manage your attention. So however you best manage what you're focusing on at a given point in time, I think is going to be one of the key aspects of productivity going forward. It's not just about capturing and collecting every little thing that you can possibly think of. It's about focusing and deciding on what's the most important. To me, it's building a top-down productivity system versus a bottom-up one, like getting things done. Then looking at life management. This might be a newer idea or concept, but it's been one I've been stewing on for 3 or 4 years now, ever since I started doing work in the productivity space as a content creator. There's this big picture that we often don't take a look at, and it's the biggest view of our lives that we can see. It's all the different areas: your finances, your relationships, your work, your personal development, your career, all sorts of different areas, your hobbies, fun, your social life, things of that sort. And life management is really the ability to see all of those areas of your life, evaluate the overall health of your life in those areas, and then to make adjustments as needed. Some people will call this maybe building special habits or having goals, but to me, it's more about making progress. because a lot of times we put goals on such short time frames that the challenge we run into with them is we don't really see the progress that we're looking to see. So, for example, if you're trying to lose 15 pounds in 6 months, you might make progress in that direction, but you might not necessarily see the full outcome of that depending on how the different factors of your life play out. However, if you continue on that trajectory, doing the things that you were doing that are healthy, leading you in that direction, you might see that result in the long run. So, life management is really the capacity and the idea to be able to see these different areas, see a long term view of life, and build into the long term versus just sitting on short term ideas. Sometimes short term goals really help get you off in the right direction, but it's being able to see that overall picture of health and make adjustments as time goes on. And that is really what I think hones down into productivity 3.0. And I think it's a subtle adjustment from productivity 2.0, but it all has to do with the mindsets and the ways that we approach how we're handling information, the work that we're doing, and the big picture of our lives. I would love to hear what you're thinking on this too. Be sure to leave a note in the chat as well. Open to taking questions or thoughts or comments. Would also love to hear from you too, where you're tuning in from and what you're thinking about today. Oh, hey, you. Thanks for joining, since there are only a couple people on. Appreciate it. Would love to hear what you're thinking about today, and if there's anything interesting that you're hearing on the stream as well. Let's see here. I wanted to show something as well here too. We just actually also launched a we just rebranded this channel. It used to be Effective Remote Work if you weren't subscribed previously. And now we're called just Effective. And the reason for that is that Effective Remote Work, I think, was just a little too limiting as far as the things that I wanted to cover. I love talking about personal knowledge management, Obsidian, productivity, but some of that just didn't really fit in under that brand. And so we just shortened the brand name down. Change visuals and stuff. And we just launched a brand new website too called thinkeffective.co. So you can, if anyone's interested, you can head on over there and sign up, kind of just keep on top of our newsletter and the different content that we're producing. We'll eventually have some kind of a paid membership there too, to support what we're doing, but also to have some premium content as well. So if you're interested in checking that out, feel free to join up over there, and we'll just appreciate you on the journey with us. Yeah, so this is just kind of fun hangout time today. So I think the next thing that I'm going to hit today is I'm going to go through an article. And it's one called, "What If We Just Stopped Being So Available?" Hey, Robert, welcome from Colorado. I just posted a link in the chat. I'll get it queued up on screen here as well. So if you haven't been on a stream before, what I'm doing here is I'm just usually going through and reading an article, talking through the ideas in the article. Excuse me just a moment. Well, that's pretty cool. Hey, you're Northeast USA, just accepted a new position, just put in 2-week notice. You're going to revisit roots and say hello to your professors. Oh, you're teaching a class after work for them. That's kind of cool. That's really fun. What kind of class are you teaching? What's the subject matter area? Robert says, I'm retired, but it seems I have little time to focus on work, time or focus to work on a couple of big projects. Yeah, that can be a real challenge. I've heard, I'm nowhere near retirement age, but I have a few friends who are retired and some relatives as well. And they've often said that they're the busiest they've ever been in their lives in retirement. What do you say would be one of the biggest challenges that you have toward finding some time? Is it things that are eating up your time or attention, more urgent things going on, or what is something like that that you think you're kind of running into as the biggest challenge there? What I was mentioning earlier before we got into chatting a little bit is generally what we do on these streams is I use the Readwise highlighter Google Chrome extension. So I'm a big Readwise user, and so I just go to a website, click the Readwise extension up here in the corner, and then I'm able to highlight directly into Readwise from here. So I'll take notes, and then because Readwise syncs into Obsidian, it's all available into my Obsidian vault really easily. Hey, you saying it will be electrical. Never taught professionally. I'd be pushing my boundaries with new positions, so I'm not afraid but concerned how I will deal with it all. Yeah, I haven't taught professionally either, but I've done a number of things speaking or done via video, and it can be really intimidating just to start off with. That's a really cool opportunity that you have though to teach. I think it'll probably pull some really some things inside you that you probably didn't even know were there in the process out. One of the things that I love about sitting down and talking with people is when they ask questions, it usually causes you to realize that you know more than you think you know, because the questions pull on you in a different way than you would if you just sat down and tried to get all that information out yourself. I don't know why that is the case, but I think it's pretty interesting. Robert is saying, I have not figured out how to copy and save YouTube content. So if you're looking at taking notes on it, there's a couple of interesting things. If you're using a tool like Obsidian, one of the things you can do is just share it right from YouTube and use the embed code and just literally copy paste it right into Obsidian so that you have the video available there. Now, granted, you're not just downloading it and putting it into your Obsidian vault. You do have to have an internet connection to play it. But then from there, you can pretty easily take notes on it, which is how I do it. There's not a great way to like segment YouTube videos and kind of pull segments from it. I know that there are a few videos or services that are starting to experiment with this. And I think even Readwise's new reader application that they're working on might be able to do this at some point in the future. So it's something to take watch of, but yeah, it's still not there's still not a lot of stuff in there. But if you're interested in anything else in regarding to copying and saving YouTube content, definitely leave another message in the chat. I'll try to help as much as I can. So this article on the screen here too, we can keep chatting while we go through this, so no worries about that. But this article on the screen is about how it's good to be intentionally disconnected. This first paragraph is about how people felt so powerful when they had Blackberries, the very first smartphone that really caught on. But it was really interesting to see this change here too, that now because everybody was so on and connected all of the time, I mean, they can do their email at 11 o'clock at night from their phone, sitting in their bed, from a Blackberry. But now everybody was kind of doing email all the time. So that's kind of a problem. I like this terminology here, a spiral of expectations. I'm going to click that article. I'll probably save that for later. I think this last sentence here is pretty key. Now, when people feel they haven't responded sufficiently quickly, they think they owe their correspondent an apology. Yep. I definitely feel that way often when I am delaying getting back to somebody. I feel bad for people who like expect a response, I guess, because there's almost like an expectation of that. But it's this weird expectation that we put on ourselves now. We don't have to respond immediately to things, especially on email. It's an asynchronous mode of communication. You don't have to be online at the same time to get a message back to somebody. And so if it takes a few days to get a response back, yeah, I mean, there was something I've had in the back of my mind for a long time is that a lot of managers and companies struggle with, oh, if I don't respond to my email right away, I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to have problems. But if something's truly urgent, it will find you. And if you need to be involved with it, it will find you. It can wait a few hours. It can wait a day often. But sometimes there's odd expectations in that process as well that are unfortunate. Kind of makes for an unhealthy work culture in some regards. Oh, yeah, cool. Yeah, Macs are awesome, and remote work is awesome. I really liked you. Bye. But I'm glad that you're enjoying the life balance and remote insights here as well. I do continue, even though we rebranded from effective remote work, I'm still very passionate about the future of work and what that looks like, including remote work. And so there will be definitely more conversations to be had around that. It's just not going to be the number one focus, but it'll be, I guess, in marketing words, it'll be one of our content pillars. One of the things that we'll talk about on YouTube, on our social channels and things of that sort. Because I very much believe that the future of work can be positively impacted if we restructure the way that we handle our companies and treat people in the process. And one of the ways that has a lot of positive benefit to it is through fully remote work. There's some challenges with that too, which anybody who's worked remotely will know. But no method of anything is perfect, really. This stream is not sponsored by Perrier, by the way. I think this is an important fact to draw out here. The acceptable window of response time has gotten much smaller in the last 10, 20 years. I mean, can you imagine what people from 100, 200 years ago would think if they saw that people were apologizing for not getting back to them within a few hours, even though they live entirely across the world? They might just think that's absolutely insane, because it would probably take a few months to even get a letter to somebody, depending on how far away they were. So it's kind of mind-blowing how small the world has gotten in the last few years due to the internet. Really, I would peg it the last 50 years, especially. It's gotten to be a lot smaller. I find it amazing. It's an amazing thing, but we have to approach things so differently. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges with modern work, is that our policies and cultural understandings of things, and even ability to recognize what's healthy and what's not early on, has been very diminished because things have been moving so quickly. We don't have that thoughtful consideration about things that we once had. I think the fast-moving nature of things can be really fun and interesting at times, but when we fail to take into account the implications of decisions and moving quickly too, that can be really challenging for people long term. I think that's part of the reason why burnout rates are so high, is because we haven't really sorted out what the best way to work is in this fast moving environment. I like the kind of philosophical take in this article. All these sorries raise the question of whether any harm is actually done when someone commits the sin of unavailability. Granted, there can be real consequences to responding slowly in a culture that considers idleness, or even just the appearance of it, to be a moral shortcoming. I find this interesting. Responding slowly in a culture that considers idleness to be a moral shortcoming. Okay, so I'm stewing on this for a second because I think there's something in here. When we have a culture that responding slowly is seen to be a moral shortcoming, there's something wrong with that culture. Sometimes things take time to think through. It's good to be thoughtful about what you do. It's good to be thoughtful about how you respond to something. And sometimes if there's consequence to it, responding hastily is actually the worst thing that you can do. So, I mean, I get the point that the author is making here, and I think the point is correct. But this whole idea of seeing that there's a real consequence in a culture that considers idleness to be a moral shortcoming, I think there's further work that needs to be done there, because idleness itself is not a bad thing. It's when it becomes a consistent pattern is when it's a bad thing. Always having to be moving and doing things and working is not how people thrive. We need a rhythm between work and rest that helps us find a better place. He says, internal email to me was always here's an official statement, you have a day or two to respond. Teams chat text being, you'll probably see this soon. Finally calling, fill the role of help, please. Yes, that's exactly the way I've seen it as well. Some people use email to say like, hey, I need your help right now. Are you around? But that's not the best way to get a hold of somebody. If you genuinely need someone's help, call them immediately. And if they're not available, they won't answer. And if they are, then they could probably help you out. And generally, what I have found in a remote setting, because I work for a company that primarily collaborates via writing, sometimes it's a heck of a lot faster to help someone out if you can talk to them on the phone instead of trying to do it via chat or on an email or something of that sort. Robert's asking, have you looked at Zettelkasten? Yes, I have. A few of the videos that I have historically on the channel talk about broad concepts from Zettelkasten. I am not a practitioner of it specifically. I really like the ideas, and in fact, a lot of the big picture ideas of Zettelkasten have influenced how I take notes and think about taking notes. So I really like the ideas there, but just the Zettelkasten method itself is a little too rigid for my taste. Let's put it that way. That's kind of why I buck getting things done as a productivity method as well. It's too defined for the way that I work with knowledge. And so I think it's definitely worth digging into some more. I've got a couple videos on literature notes, permanent notes, which are kind of some of the big picture ideas from Zettelkasten that I like. and have it adopted into my PKM workflow. But I think Zettelkasten.de is one of the best places to learn specifically about that method. And then to answer your question too about the title of this article, it's titled "What If We Just Stopped Being So Available?" And it's from January of this year on the Atlantic. Yeah, January 14th. Well, I think this is interesting. Like, I think the level of relational intimacy impacts the urgency to respond in a timely fashion. So, like, if you have a loved one who says, I love you, and you respond 2 days later, yeah, that's not good. But there's a heightened level of relational intimacy there. But if a coworker says, hey, what are your thoughts on this thing that really has no consequence for another 3 months? It probably doesn't make sense for you to reply back within 30 seconds. So there's definitely something to that. There's expectations that are weirdly set. I think that's really the gist of this article is that we have weird expectations around availability in our modern work due to the fact of how connected we are. We think we have to respond right away, but actually people are okay if we take our time. I know they're talking about the phrase "sorry for my delay" and how they hate using that. Um, Honestly, I've started catching myself, unless it's like something I'm genuinely actually sorry for. Because there are occasions where I just don't get to something for a few days, and it's something eventually is longer. Like especially if it's a personal relationship that I have with someone. Um, but in just a work context setting, uh, unless there's urgency involved there, sorry for my delay has been removed from my vocabulary. Yeah, so Robert, are you wondering about it being Zettelkasten being expensive for the tools? Um, if so, Obsidian, you can have a legitimate Zettelkasten workflow inside of Obsidian, and Obsidian's completely free. So if cost is a concern for you, definitely keep that in mind. If you want to use Obsidian Sync service, there is an annual fee for that, which I definitely recommend if someone can afford it. But if not, you can use file syncing services. You can use Git on GitHub to sync between devices. There are a lot of different ways you can sync your Obsidian Vault to different devices if you so desire, or if you just want to have it locally, you can too. Just make sure it's backed up. Yeah, well, that was an interesting article. I don't think it had as much actionable, interesting information in it as I thought there was going to be. Yeah. I'm not going to have time to get to this one today, but I'm going to save it for later. And we will kind of go on. So definitely recommend checking out that article. There's some interesting stuff in it. EU says, sorry for the delay, seems to have filled a gap in text-based communication, similar to how people say, to fill space between thoughts. That's a really interesting point. Not one that I had considered at all, but I think you're probably right at something like that. Point taken right there. But you're probably right, because people sometimes get it in their heads, the ones who are taking a time to respond to something, like, oh, I have to fill that time in for someone else. Oh yeah, I was doing other stuff, I'm sorry. But a lot of times we're so focused on ourselves that we send a message off and we don't even notice that we don't get a response for something for 3-4 days, a week, sometimes even a couple of weeks. Depends on how urgent it is. I know there have been times where I've sent emails where I sent it off and I completely forgot that I sent it. And then a couple of weeks later, it comes back to mind, like, oh yeah, I should follow up on that. Say, hey, how you doing? Is this, can this happen? Or what's the status of this? But it's not usually anything urgent at that point. When it's urgent is when things get to be challenging for me. I know that's the big thing. But again, email is not the best way to communicate urgency. I will say that I do need to wrap up here because I have another obligation soon. But definitely thank you all for hopping on the stream. I probably have time for one question if someone has one. Otherwise, we'll catch up on the next one if you're interested in joining. We do try to do these every week around 12:30 or 1 o'clock Central Time on Thursdays. Hence why they're called Think With Me Thursdays. And yeah, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, do be sure to do so. If you want to head on over to our new website again, Think Effective SEO. I'll pop it up on the screen here for everybody. If you want to head on over to thinkeffective.co to stay up to date with our content. I do plan on announcing our weekly live streams and the plans there in the near future. I just got to sort out the planning process for that before I commit to sending it out every single time we're going to do one. But yeah, hey you, thanks. It was great for hanging out. Robert, I'm glad we were able to talk about Obsidian. If you want to hang out on the channel here, I've got a number of videos talking through Obsidian. We even have a course too, if you're interested in that. You don't have to buy that if you don't want to. There's a lot of information you can glean for free here on the channel. We are working on version 2 of Obsidian Made Simple, so if you do get it now, you'll get version 2 for free as part of the upgrade process. So no worries on that too. But yeah, I appreciate everybody joining the stream today. We were kind of experimenting with a new way to do this using Restream, and I actually really quite like it. And so I think I'm going to continue doing this. And plus, it gives us a good setup that if we decide to do podcasting in the future, then I can really easily do that. I can bring on guests into Restream and we can have a conversation right here on the live stream and then get it all recorded and everything too, which I think is pretty nice. But anyway, you all have a good rest of your Thursday, whatever part of the day it is for you, where you are. And stay effective in the meantime until we talk again.